lot of talk going on right now about that there's a lot of CO2 in the atmosphere and what exactly that means. While there's a lot of debate on how and why this rapid increase is happening right now, it is clear that this is the most CO2 we've seen in the atmosphere since humans have been around. And actually, it's the most CO2 in the atmosphere than there ever has been historically that we know of. In fact, even ice samples from about 800,000 years ago show much less CO2 in the atmosphere than right now. And so I'm not really going to talk about, why or what is leading to these huge releases of CO2 in the atmosphere. I'm here to talk about what it's doing to our plants and animals and our environments, and maybe ways that we can kind of help slow the rapid release of CO2 in our atmosphere. So let's first talk about what CO2 is and really what it does in the atmosphere. In fact, it's a very important element of our atmosphere. It helps retain heat, basically kind of helps keep a blanket around the planet itself. And without CO2, the planet would be a much colder and inhospitable place to humans at the very least. However, when this gets out of hand, clearly it goes from being a blanket that'll keep us comfortably warm to basically a Tyvek suit in the middle of a 95-degree heat wave in full sun. So it can go from pampering us and keeping us comfortable to boiling us in our own skin pretty quickly. And it seems like this CO2 is getting to the amount that it is starting to increase the planet's temperature pretty rapidly. One important thing to keep in mind is that CO2 is obviously used by plants as a critical component of photosynthesis. And so they use CO2 to create energy and to grow themselves. And so you might be thinking to yourself, well, if there's more CO2 in the atmosphere, does it mean that plants can grow faster and larger than they had ever before? And actually, yes, that is what's happening. However, this comes with a downside. Actually, what studies are finding is that plants are able to grow at really unheard of paces currently, just mostly due to huge amounts of CO2 in the air. And because CO2 is so readily available, they're able to just photosynthesize basically their hearts out and grow to be big, basically mammoth size. And they're able to create much more energy in the form of starch and sugars and other stored energy reserves than they had before. And again, while this sounds great, the downside is because these plants are able to create so much energy in the form of starch and sugars, they're actually crowding out some other nutrients from their fruits and foliage as well, just because they're trying to cram so much of that stored energy that actually fruits and vegetables are becoming less nutritious because they're just being packed with more sugars and starches instead of the nutrients and phytochemicals that are normally in them. And so basically, because of this huge flux of CO2 in the atmosphere, our fruits and vegetables are basically turning into fast food, becoming much less nutritious and actually worse for us to eat than they used to be. And even more interestingly, pollen is seeming to have some of the same effects. And studies are finding that pollen has about half of the protein content in it today than it did in, say, the 1800s. And so this is critically dangerous for especially solitary bee species, which, as we learned, basically gather a specifically sized ball of pollen that they leave for their young to feed on after the adult is gone. And so if this sized ball of pollen is now, only half as much protein as it was historically, chances are those young bees aren't able to grow nearly as fast or as healthily as they could in the past. And so this is expected to have drastic impacts on a wide variety of wildlife. And so even though it is a good thing in a way that plants are able to grow a little bit faster because of CO2, it does come at a downside, whereas they're also becoming a little bit less beneficial as far as feeding and catering to the animals that rely on those plants for survival as well. Studies are also finding, however, that CO2 increases in the atmosphere are negatively affecting crop yields. It's estimated that for every additional ton of CO2 released into the atmosphere, crop yields are impacted by 3.5 to $8.5 billion. And while a ton of CO2 seems like a lot, just last year alone, it is estimated that over 30 billion tons of CO2 were released into the atmosphere. And so, again, it's almost incalculable the cost that this CO2 is causing to the world around us. And this negative effect is probably due to temperature increases as well. So as plants are appreciating the increased amount of CO2 in the atmosphere for their own use in photosynthesis, the rising temperatures that comes along with those increases in CO2 do increase pest numbers as far as insect and other pests, and it's just harder for those plants to grow. Also, it requires more water for them to grow as well. And so it's a multifaceted, really difficult problem. And again, we're just now kind of learning about some of those deep-reaching roots of large amounts of CO2 in the atmosphere. However, it's becoming clear that we need to take heed and at the very least try and slow the spread of these gases into our atmosphere. These carbon dioxide emissions, once they're released into the air, they don't just stay there. And in fact, about a quarter of global carbon dioxide emissions are believed to fall and go right back into the ocean. And this actually makes the ocean more acidic the more carbon dioxide is in it. And scientists believe that the oceans today are about 30% more acidic than they were around 200 years ago. This is having some pretty strange effect on ocean wildlife. Some, like jellyfish, are actually able to thrive in these kind of warmer, more acidic waters. However, others, especially shellfish, some are actually being eaten away by that acid. And some shellfish have actually been found to have extremely thin exoskeletons because of this, again, acidic water that's constantly eating away at them. And so it's incredibly important, again, to be aware that these carbon dioxide emissions, they're not just warming up the planet, they're causing pretty severe side effects in all facets of the ecosystems around us. Higher acidity also changes the behavior of some fish. So for example, some young fish raised in highly acidic environments are more apt to venture out into sunny, well-lit, more dangerous areas of water. And as such, they tend to live much shorter lives than fish that have been raised in normal water environments. And so, again, it is changing also the way animals act, as well as kind of how they grow and mature. While all these facts are relatively sobering and should be taken as an alarming red flag to our entire generation, the scarier truth is that we know very little about the long-term effects of these high levels of CO2 in our oceans and in our environments. And so as studies are being conducted and scientists are learning more and more about these long-term deleterious effects of too much carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, again, it's important just to, at the very least, keep in mind the amount of this greenhouse gas that you spread, and also keeping in mind the importance of robust both soil health and plant health in ecosystems of diverse native plants. Those are the areas that can sequester the most of this atmospheric carbon, both in the plants themselves and in the soil as well, through those microbes making that protein globulin. And so, again, by maintaining a garden that has a wide variety of native plants, which caters to a wide variety of other native beneficial wildlife, especially beneficial microbes in the soil, you can actually do quite a lot and actually reduce and give yourself a negative carbon footprint just by having kind of a landscape that acts as a carbon sponge and stores carbon for the long term in the soil and around your gardens.